Liberty.me, I am Kyle Platt, here with Dr. Gary Gallus, author of Faulty Premises, Faulty Policies, the new ebook on Liberty.me. Thank you so much for being here, Gary.
It's good to be here.
Let's talk a little bit about Piketty. This book that he has.
Is that That's his name? I've only read it. I've never heard it. Is it Piketty?
I'm not sure either. Okay,
well, we can call him anything then.
That's the. Well, no, be careful now. I mean, I don't want to get into a pejorative here. No, you know, French last names are so interesting that way because they don't usually follow the rules of French pronunciation. So I don't know. But his book is the new great economic text, economic maybe in quotations, of the left. He's in many ways the successor to like John Kenneth Galbraith or something like that. But I see
my opinion of John Kenneth Galbraith does not lead well to this because he is someone I think of as a good writer who I would not even characterize as an economist, because when it comes down to economics, he always gets it wrong.
You preempted what I was going to say.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. But that's what I see the connection there, in that both of these fellows are telling people what they want to hear, which is fine. I mean, that's what most of us do. That's what I'm doing with this interview.
That's right. Better analogy is to Keynes' general theory, which told politicians what they wanted to do in the Great Depression anyway, which is why it got such a favorable response, even though it's full of holes.
My question about Piketty, though, is, you know, you run in circles of economists, or maybe, I'm just assuming.
Run from them, as the case may be.
Okay. What is the position? Maybe it's been too early, or maybe there hasn't been enough time since the book came out. What is the position of serious economists that are doing real economic work, of not only people like Piketty in his book, but just the kind of popularizers, the kinds of people that use the premises of, you know, this is economic thought, but instead are really only writing works for people that agree with them?
Oh, well, one example is I had there was a book by Robert Reich that, I don't know, maybe 2 years ago, I'm trying to remember. My across-the-street neighbor, we talked about economic stuff, basically had read the book and wondered what I thought. So I said, well, I haven't read it, but I can tell you now I won't think much of it. So anyway, he handed me the book, and I said, okay, I'd try and read it and get back to it. So I was going from Pepperdine, my regular job, to teach a class at UCLA, and Sunset Boulevard was just stopped. So I was on Sunset Boulevard for like 2.5 hours. I read the book while in my car, stopped on the road trying to get to UCLA. There was not a single verifiable, useful fact in the book.
Huh.
Right? He keep repeating things that aren't legitimate and then build on it. He's basically preaching to the choir. Same thing for this Piketty book. He's saying things people want to learn. Let's tax the rich. Let's redistribute. Well, it's driven by what they want the answer to be, not a comparison of what he actually argues. So, for instance, one interesting thing is the interpretation is he's saying the rich always get richer compared to the others. Well, if you look at his own data, that's not true. If you look at the last century, the percentage of wealth held by the rich went up going into 1929 and then plummeted, and went up going into basically 2006, 2007, and then it went down. Well, the interesting thing about that is those increases in their shares that were then undone are not caused by capitalism. They are caused by booms caused by monetary policy, right? 1929 was this boom. Well, what happens? People who are invested do really well during the boom. So what happens to their share of measured income? It goes up. Well, that boom ends. Those same people lose their shirts at that point, and so it goes down. So to interpret that as caused by capitalism, when it was caused by monetary expansion and crony capitalism and regulations, is to basically blame the wrong thing, which has always made me wonder about people on the left.
Well,
they
sure.
can attribute to capitalism things where there's 97 million things in the way and say, well, that's because of capitalism.
Well, you have like 95% of human history, and almost everyone on Earth is destitute. And then randomly, not randomly, but through like this coalescence of events, starting in like the 1800s, I'm thinking of Deirdre McCloskey's work right now. You have this huge spike.
I knew him when he was Don McCloskey.
What?
I knew him when he was Don McCloskey.
Oh, yeah. But I don't understand how you can say, well, capitalism is this inherently oppressive force. Was capitalism oppressing people for 95% of human history? And now that more people are rich than have ever been before, is that because now they're suddenly, because that's Piketty's thing, is that people, once they accumulate capital, they hang on to it.
Well, and it grows. Now, there are a couple issues about that. First of all, he has data supposedly back to the year zero, or estimates. His estimates back through up to 1800 have to be wrong, because he has this really high estimated return to capital during a period where the average annual per capita growth rate was 0.1% for a millennia. There can't be a huge return to capital and virtually no growth, right? So there's something wrong with his own data in the long term, right? He implies an impossibly high rate of return to capital. And since the 1800s, right, he implies that this is this continuous process where the rich just get richer. His own data don't support it. The rich get richer in booms, but then they get substantially poor, the same ones, and there's a good reason for it. When a boom happens, the only people invested in that boom asset are people who have liquid assets, who are older people who have, they've earned money, they've set it aside in savings. They're already in a demographic, peak earning years or later, that already shows up as having a lot of income. Well, they're the ones that invest in the boom asset, and they get those measured increases, right? So those gains always go to the already rich. But then the losses happen. But the idea is, if that's caused by crony capitalism, it's luck. You happen to be there in the right place when they produce this monetary expansion, so you look rich, but then you get poor. Well, if his argument is you get continuously richer, how do you explain the getting poor when those artificial bubbles burst? And it's also related to supply-side economics. One of the arguments the left always uses is if you lower tax rates, say on capital gains, whatever it is, the benefits mainly go to rich people. Well, the current benefits go to rich people because they're the ones that are already invested, right? But the losses are going to go to rich people too if it doesn't work, right? They only look at one and ignore the other. But in supply-side economics, it's the wrong question. Every way of improving incentives are going to benefit the people who have those skills or assets at the time it happens. But from society's perspective, the question is, do you have better incentives to produce for and cooperate with others? The long-run incentive is the key. All of us have better incentives with lower tax rates and less intrusive regulations. And it's those long-run effects that are the key to social growth, but they always focus on the wrong thing. The short-run effects, which always look like it always go to the rich. I would say from Piketty's stuff, he's interpreting the rich get richer, right? And it always happens, right? But who gets poorer when things get worse faster? The rich people get poorer faster than others get. So I would interpret him as asking the wrong questions. Plus, I think inequality in the first place is stupid. It's a policy based on envy. If I help you, does it hurt anybody else unless they're envious?
No, I don't think so.
Well, but so to say inequality matters only means people are full of envy, and we have to base policy on envious people who don't want others to be successful, right? That's not a policy for success, growth, happiness. It is a horrible idea, and yet they don't even examine that question. Why, if somebody doesn't? But that's where you get back to crony capitalism.
Well, cronyism exists, that's for sure, but cronyism does not cease to exist under socialism. I mean, it's not an exclusively capitalist thing.
Well, that's true, but they always portray it as if it is, because what they do is, you'll notice, they try and find every wart in the current system and say that's capitalism. They never spell out exactly what that socialist world would look like, because if you actually had an experiment, it wouldn't look like they say. So they keep this vague promise of socialism, and they compare it with the specifics of today. And every specific that's based on government intervention, they then blame on markets. You know, like the Road to Serfdom, Hayek's book, right? They intervene here saying it's a market failure when it's not. But that leads to another failure, and they say, it's another market failure, which it's not. Let's intervene and intervene and intervene, and you end up in socialism.
Yeah. I mean, this may be fallacious, and tell me if it is. But if this is the worst situation of capitalism, what we have right now in 21st century Western capitalism, or Western sort of capitalism, if this is the worst we can get, and the worst you can get out of socialism is like Stalinist Russia, I don't think it's a hard choice.
Well, compare this to the best you can get in socialist Russia, and it's better than the best.
Yeah.
Right? Go back to the whole Misesian calculation debate in the 20s and 30s. Socialist economies cannot work efficiently. Right? It's literally logically impossible. That was the point of Hayek's use of knowledge in society. If you accept that the government can know all the relevant stuff, yes, you could get an efficient economy. But the government can't know all the stuff, which means logically it's impossible to get efficiency. So the best socialism has ever done is worse than the worst capitalism has ever done. I mean, it's like in Venn diagrams, those things don't even overlap.
Right. Sure, sure.
But my students tell me they don't do Venn diagrams anymore. Ah, too bad.
So, in terms of how we will think of Piketty a decade from now, when I look at Nobel Prize winning economists, I see a lot of individuals with free market ideas. Friedman, Buchanan, Hayek, even Krugman. Krugman wrote his Nobel Prize stuff, his Nobel Prize winning research on free trade. I don't know what happened since then, but it was on free trade. It seems to me that, and this, I hope this isn't just confirmation bias, but it seems to me that the people who do real substantive research in the field of economics, the kind of research that changes the game, the kind of research that wins Nobel Prizes, it's not this kind of socialism plus graphs economics that that Piketty does. It's people who are working with free trade and free markets. I hope that's not confirmation bias, but that's what it seems to be.
Some of Nobel Prize winners are like that, but increasing, because remember, these are selected by a committee of Swedish citizens who can give Al Gore, Nobel Prizes, and can give an about-to-be president the Nobel Prize when he'd done nothing but promise stuff. Mm-hmm. It's a popularity contest.
So how do free marketers win when it seems like we're not very popular in academia?
They won primarily earlier on, first of all. Of late, you don't find many free market sorts. I think part of it is those, from my view, those economists whose Nobel Prizes were really for mathematics, not really for economics. Paul Samuelson, Larry Klein, those sorts of people, they got it because they were mathematicians, not because they were economists. And the problem is mathematicians will accept premises that I think are false. To do the math, for instance, you have to assume away uncertainty. Well, how much of the world is caused by uncertainty? You assume away uncertainty to make the math work, and you're going to be wrong about lots of stuff. But the main thing I see is if I think the world is correctly represented by my equations, are there ever unintended consequences? Exactly. I think I can control everything. Nothing bad happens because I think my equations are reality. So you base on the equations, you go out there, and it turns out you're wrong because you can't control a lot of the stuff. So I do think the more mathematical the economist, the more likely they are to just be a mathematician and lean left, right? But there's more of those kind of economists than there are people who are, deep thinkers and change stuff. And you get marginalized, right? If you say libertarian things, right, you get dismissed from a lot of stuff.
Sure.
Most of the things you dismiss from, thank God, I wouldn't want to be involved with. But, but the money would be nice.
Do you think it has anything to do with libertarians knowing and understanding, and I hope that all of us and all the people viewing understand this very well, that in the current academic mold, you have to be better than everyone. Because people want to accept socialist ideas. They think that that's the future. They still think that's the future somehow. You have to do the work better than anyone else. Is that the case for...
It's true. You have to know. See, the problem is if they're all technical, you have to know all that technique, plus you have to know how to think about it and why that technique isn't all there is. And since you have to do it in virtually everywhere, you are overwhelmed with the burdens because it's like putting the burden of proof on you. You say X. Every time I'm going to put the burden of proof on you. And the real issue is, if you look at reality, your stuff doesn't predict. It doesn't accurately characterize important stories. The burden of proof should be on them. But somehow they've moved the burden of proof onto dissenters, right? And to get published, to get to that notoriety, if you don't have some optimization model, it doesn't matter how important it is. It won't get published in a good journal. So you're marginalized because that's all that gets published is that technical stuff. If you don't do the technical stuff, then, it's just too bad. But my problem is usually the mistakes come prior to the technique, right? I'm assuming away uncertainty because, right, I need it to make the math work. Well,
Sure.
wait, you can't maximize profits, for instance, under uncertainty, right? That word you hear every time in an econ class. Well, to know what to maximize profits, I need to know with certainty what the demand curve is. I need to know with certainty what the cost curve is, and then I can do my nifty mathematics. Well, what if you don't know what demand is, and you don't know what its elasticity, and the reality? You can't use your technique. So it actually you have to accept those errors to do the math.
Definitely.
And so if the problem comes before that, right, they simply are going to reject it. You're saying my life's work is wasted. Well, a lot of it is. Paul Hayne once said, 95% at least of what's published in economics journals should never have been published because it has nothing to do with reality or advancing human well-being.
Huh. Well, that's a somewhat depressing way to end it.
But wait, when you said how marginalized you are, I have been told by so many of my UCLA students, and I've taught there 25 years as well as Pepperdine.
Sure.
I probably had like 10,000 students. And I can't tell you how many times students have said, I have never had a professor like you in my life. Yes, you are massively outnumbered in college. And college is the place where you have the greatest impact. Because as I explain to my students, you think you're better. No, you're just not corrupt yet. Because what happens is once you're specialized, then government can punish you or reward you at its discretion. It gets much more costly to be principal. As a student, you're not specialized yet, so you can actually be principal, except for the aid for students, of course. You can't be principal there, right? So you try and reach them before they're specialized because that raises the cost of being principal. But what stops that from that natural scenario is who tenures who. To get tenure, you have to be approved basically by the already tenured.
Sure.
Well, there's a liberal bias. How hard is it to get on a faculty, to get promoted as a faculty as a libertarian? That's hard. So the deck is definitely stacked against them. Well, one of the reasons I write stuff like that end up in faulty premises, faulty policies, is early on I decided I was going to, in effect, not do journal articles very much, simply because I didn't think they were very valuable. I didn't think they were useful. In fact, to be likely to be wrong is right. And I wanted to tell my students the principles we can learn here are very powerful. And I'm going to show you. So I've written, I don't remember, 13, 14, 1,500 articles to start it out to show, look, what the principles you have here are sufficient to evaluate policies in a huge range of areas to find that almost all of them are faulty. You don't need the math to see where the errors are. And so partly what I've done with this book is I've tried to say if somebody was serious about teaching public policy from a libertarian perspective, you could use my book along with, more technical sorts of things if you wanted. I'm going to use it in my public finance class as a supplement, right, to illustrate how this stuff works. But also, if you were interested in understanding and weren't trained in economics, you're going to have to think carefully, but you can understand my book. And I think it'd be very powerful.
Very good. Very good.
Pay my friends to say.
What?
That's what I pay my friends to say.
Oh, yeah. Well, you don't have to pay me because it's great stuff. Get on to Liberty.me and check out Faulty Premises, Faulty Policies by Dr. Gary Gallus. And Gary, I very much appreciate you coming on.
Check out the picture on the back. You'll see a picture of my handsome dog, too.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much, Gary.
Nice to talk to you.
And you as well. Have a great day.